Remember all that property tax relief lawmakers are touting earlier this year? Well, get ready for the bait and switch as several proposals are coming down the pike in 2024 that could undo all this relief. For starters, several lawmakers made headlines earlier this week for holding discussions about making it easier for school districts to manipulate elections to pass bonds. You will also find the Department of Health and Welfare is entertaining a proposal to centralize ambulance services at the state level and lift limits on how their budgets impact your property tax bill. On this week's episode of Fiscal Fridays, we will preview the tax fight that looms ahead for conservatives in 2024. Starting with the schools, it seems that these taxing districts have an insatiable drive for more funds. School districts are persistently vexed by the high standards they are held to when indebting taxpayers with government bonds. The Idaho Constitution requires a 2/3 supermajority to do this. This is because the bonds are long-term obligations that raise taxes for about a decade. The proposal would change the Idaho Constitution to reduce the threshold for passing a bond to a 3/5 majority if the election is held in November. There should be overwhelming support among those paying these taxes before they are enacted. It increases the cost of living for property owners, renters, businesses, and, by extension, goods. As if inflation was not enough, new taxes add insult to injury. Remember just last year that Governor Little spoke of historic investments in public education and teacher pay? The legislature held a special session to offer public schools an annual increase of $330 million. House Bill 292, passed this year, promised to distribute $100 million to public schools to relieve property tax burdens. The total budget request for the public schools for the next fiscal year is still within 0.5% of the original appropriations from last year at a whopping $3.4 billion. One would think that nearly $500 million in new funding offered within the last 12 months would be enough for schools, but bureaucrats are shamelessly pushing for even more funding. Additionally, it is not impossible to get bonds passed with the 2/3 majority. According to the State Department of Education, Idahoans in 42 school districts will pay over $72 million in bond redemption and interest payments. Rather than asking for more money, perhaps districts should put more of an emphasis on making their operations more efficient. Perhaps they should consider what they should do with the $1 billion stowed away in the coffers for a, quote, rainy day. If you think the schools are bad, just wait until you hear the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare is cooking up for 2024. The department convened a special committee to study EMS services throughout the state. It's called the EMS Sustainability Task Force. The point of the task force is to professionalize the state's EMS workforce and improve access to services by classifying it as an essential service by the government. But what this means is the centralization of the system at the state instead of being run by the counties. It also means increasing costs to pay staff and threatens to render the volunteer system extinct. The task force is run by a plethora of special interests that stand to have a lot to gain from getting an additional injection of money from the state. So what does it cost exactly? Convening the task force cost $700,000 in itself, but what IFF Legislative Affairs Director Fred Birnbaum noted in his testimony against the bill was that this was merely a down payment on a very large and expensive program. Preliminary plans for funding distribution considered by the task force pegged the costs at about $14.6 million annually. This would mean an additional $200,000 to $400,000 per county. One member proposed eliminating the 3% cap on budget increases funded by property taxes if the budget belongs to an essential service. This would initially allow for an essential government service to raise their budget at will, without regard to the effect on property taxes. This policy would quickly run into the wholesale elimination of the limit, as any government entity could make an argument that they are essential too. Neither of these issues are set in stone, but conservatives have quite the fight ahead of them in 2024. Unfortunately, these programs have a lot of establishment support behind them, making their defeat a very tall order. Taxpayers cannot rely on Idaho's Republican supermajority to stop these efforts. The GOP platform of low taxes may struggle to hold up under the weight of those masquerading as conservatives. We knew this from the data collected by the Idaho Freedom Index and the Spending Index. It turns out that 71% of the Senate and 67% of the House voted for more spending and larger government more than half of the time last year. Thus, if the true conservatives cannot turn the tides on these issues, Idahoans can say goodbye to the tax cuts they were promised just a few months ago. In all, government agencies are eager to continue to grow their operations at all costs, even to those they claim to serve. Though one could always argue that an agency could do better with more money, they really should be challenged to make do. After all, government agencies rarely improve that much by simply funding it more. Thank you for being loyal viewers of Fiscal Fridays this year. We are going to give our editors a break for the holidays, but we'll be back with all the updates at the start of the legislative session. If you have questions or comments on any of our episodes, please leave a comment or email us at media@idahofreedom.org. Also, if you want more episodes of Fiscal Fridays or other great content from the Idaho Freedom Foundation, please visit idahofreedom.org.